You obey, and the world claps. You play by the rules, stay in line, do what's expected, and you're rewarded. But deep inside, something goes numb. Not because you're doing wrong, but because you're not doing you. You stop hearing your own voice. You start performing instead of living. Imagine this. You wake up and feel the quiet urge to rebel, but instead, you smile, nod, and carry on. You think you're free because no one's holding a gun to your head, but the leash isn't around your neck, it's inside your mind. You don't need a prison when your own beliefs do the policing. That's how deep the addiction goes. Obedience isn't just compliance, it's spiritual anesthesia. You silence your instincts, suppress your wildness, flatten your soul for the sake of being good. You dress your cage in gold and call it virtue, but you feel it. That ache behind the smile. That friction between who you are and who you're allowed to be. You weren't born obedient, you were trained into it, conditioned by fear, praise, punishment, and silence. You learned that truth gets you in trouble, that authenticity makes you unsafe, that to be loved, you must first be edited. So you obey, not because you trust, but because you've learned not to trust yourself. And here's the crack. You're praised for being manageable, respected for being reliable, loved for being predictable. But none of it feels real. You play your part so well, you forget it's a part. You think you're free, but you're just an actor, terrified to drop the script. Because what if you disappear when the mask falls? Carl Jung didn't see obedience as harmless. He saw it as shadow-making. Every time you follow the herd against your inner voice, a piece of you breaks off and slips underground. The more you obey, the more you exile. And what you exile doesn't die. It waits, builds pressure, and haunts you from the dark. You call it anxiety, burnout, self-doubt, but it's your suppressed self trying to speak the parts you silenced to stay accepted, loved, safe. They start to rot in the basement of your psyche. Jung called this the shadow, and the more obedient you are on the surface, the more violent it becomes below. Nietzsche warned of this too. He said the greatest danger isn't chaos, it's obedience without examination. The soul doesn't shrink because of sin, but because of suppression. We become hollow, tame, dull, ruled not by strength, but by the quiet terror of being cast out for thinking differently. You obey because you were punished for being real. Somewhere early, you learned that no gets you in trouble. Why makes adults flinch? And I don't agree gets you labeled difficult. So you learned to conform, not out of belief, but survival. And once that groove is carved, the mind follows it automatically. But the ego loves obedience. It thrives on approval, reputation, order, image. It wants to be seen as good, even if it costs your soul, and culture rewards it. Every structure built on hierarchy, school, church, workplace, even family, depends on your willingness to kneel. So you do, not knowing that each bow takes something sacred with it. You think you're making choices, but you're acting out a script written by fear. You work a job you hate, nod in conversations you disagree with, smile when you feel rage, all to avoid disruption. Obedience becomes a reflex, not a decision. You stop choosing, you start performing, and the performance gets applause. You're called responsible, reasonable, well-adjusted, but inside, you're shrinking. Your days feel heavy, your nights restless. You begin to forget what you even want. You've learned how to win approval, but lost the instinct to follow your soul. This shapes everything: how you love, how you parent, how you lead. You don't raise children, you replicate control. You don't fall in love, you seek safety. You don't express truth, you seek alignment. You live in constant anticipation of what others expect and call it maturity. But that's not maturity, it's domestication. Your wildness has been conditioned out of you. The edge in your voice, the spark in your eye, the depth in your hunger, all blunted to fit inside the walls of a good life. But no truth ever lived in a cage. Every act of obedience chips away at your inner compass. You start needing rules to feel safe. You wait for permission to act. You look to others to define what's right, and soon you can't move without a leash. Not because you're weak, but because you've been expertly trained. Freedom begins not with rebellion, but with awareness. You have to notice the invisible chains, the subtle yes when you meant no, the silence when you felt fire, the smile when you felt pain. Awareness turns the cage from invisible to unbearable, and that's when the door appears. The shift doesn't come through defiance, it comes through remembrance. You remember the voice before it was edited, the instinct before it was judged, the impulse before it was shamed, and you start listening again. Not to the world, but to the quiet pulse of what's true inside you. Jung called this individuation, becoming who you truly are, not who you were trained to be. It's not easy. It costs comfort, validation, safety. But it gives you something greater, the ability to face yourself and not look away, to live from the core, not the costume. You reclaim your yes, and it means something now. You reclaim your no, and it builds a boundary, not a wall. You say what you mean, not what's accepted. You stop explaining, you start choosing. You move from reaction to creation, from conditioning to consciousness. The world may call it selfish, but this is the most sacred kind of service. Because the more alive you are, the more truth you bring into the world. Not compliance, not politeness, truth. And that truth ripples. It gives others permission to break their own chains. You will not be fully free until you are fully honest, not with the world, with yourself. Until you admit how much of your life has been lived for applause, for approval, for not being abandoned. Until you whisper the words, "I don't know who I am without the rules." But this is not your failure. This is your awakening. Because now you see the false self, the one shaped by shame and reward. And now you can let it fall. You can stop managing perception and start embodying truth. Not to impress, not to be safe, but to be whole. The real you is not wild or reckless. It's just alive. It doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be seen. It doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be felt. When you stop obeying, you don't become a danger to others. You become a danger to illusion. You were not born to be palatable. You were born to be real. Not pleasing, but powerful. Not silent, but sincere. And this shift from performance to presence is the moment your soul returns to your body. The moment you step out of the script and start living the page. Freedom is not granted, it is remembered. It lives beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the mask. And when you finally hear your own voice again, trembling, uncertain, raw, you'll know this is you, and you are enough.